So welcome back everybody, this is Paul again. This is the third of my series about esoteric studies. I've been studying a lot of meditation for many years, and I've always been very fascinated by some of the really ancient teachings about consciousness and about life and about the value of a human life and so on. And I mentioned some of them in the previous segments, the Patanjali, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Buddhist teachings and teachings from the Upanishads, and many places around the world talk about basically how to use our awareness. In the first segment I was talking about just how being really open and sincere and a desire to learn, that really draws a lot of fantastic experiences in life, because people who go through their life, they're always willing to learn something. They're going to have a pretty fascinating life, you know. And many people who have done that in the past have explored the inner realms of consciousness and practiced meditation and lived sometimes by our standards very strange ways. But nevertheless they had some interesting stories to tell. And the segment I'm going to talk about right now has to do with sound and silence, because when we start to concentrate, in many cases people say, well, you should make a sound, or you should focus on a sound or something. And so sound has a very powerful real technology in harnessing the human understanding and bringing it to a place of peace and bringing it to a state of realization. But what is often not mentioned, is talked about, is the sound, the silence. Because and silence has to do with an audible silence, but also has to do with, you might say, a kind of static electricity. Perhaps you can remember the days of the television where you tuned in, you had to get this antenna just right, and if you didn't get it quite just right, then you'd have this horrible noise and this crazy signal that came in, flickering back and forth with the one you're trying to see. But when we get to a place of calmness and quietness, it's almost anti-noise and noise canceling, you might say, for the inner brain. Because we have to have a reference point. To understand anything, basically you have to have some kind of reference point. And when you talk about consciousness, it talks about stillness. What is thinking inside us? And I've done many quotes from the Upanishads about how they say that we really need to know who is thinking, who is hearing. And the reference point is just a calm state, either physical quietness, but physical quietness, having a quiet room, for example, is nothing compared to the deep silence when that static electricity, that chattering of our human awareness stops. And not just stops, but takes a long break. And it sounds like a very simple thing. Well, you got to have silence. But I'll give you an example in terms of the reference point. I'm a student of aviation, and I've done some solo flying already, and it's a very amazing experience, and takes a lot of responsibility and training and self-confidence and so on. But before, the question is, long before you get into planes, like, okay, well, am I ready? And then every step along the way, say, am I ready? And if I'm not ready, then is my plane ready? Then if my plane isn't ready, then, and so on. And then you have to find out conditions. And it's an activity of consciousness to pay attention to moments and their succession, which is a phrase from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. You focus on the continuous moments in their precession, you might say. Because if you take our time, we break our time arbitrarily into, say, okay, this is seconds and minutes and so on, calculated on the rotation of the Earth and the Sun and so on. But somewhere inside us, in the rhythm of this being, naturally our body is going to follow the rhythmic cycles of the sun. I mean, it's a part of nature. We can't, it's hard to escape that. It's just, so if you say, well then, maybe our mind, has to go along with it, because if I have my body's trying to do one thing and then my mind's trying to do another thing, then I have a conflict. And part of that you can distinguish a true and authentic feeling or a true need by being still. Aside from the practical benefits of many other reasons of being still, you can make clear decisions and understandings about your own personal motives and what you're doing and so on. It's a way of being conscious by being aware of minutes and seconds. And a lot of people know this, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just say, look, before we perceive anything, we want to talk about all these fantastic things. We want to talk about cosmic physics. We want to talk about astronomy and astrology and all kinds of different things, things that aren't even written about. But the thing is that we have to prepare our own awareness. And it reminds me of a story I heard many, many years ago. They were making this big, huge mirror for a huge telescope, and this was a long time ago. And they were grinding this mirror. They were trying to use computer technology to just grind this mirror perfectly, perfectly smooth, so that when they sent this telescope out into space, it would have a really, really clear view. So they wanted to get this mirror really perfect. And supposedly it took them 11 years. Okay, well then tiny little mistakes and tiny little mistakes. Okay, we got to fix this over here, fix this over here. Just continuously make it perfect. In the same way we get our attention. We prepare our attention by being still, by being receptive, by being, like you might say, mercury, a pool of mercury that is part solid and part liquid and sense any kind of subtle vibrations. It makes them into a liquid, solid sort of state, So I'm going to talk a lot about silence and sound, because sound actually is a very, very great power, and I can't go into it much here because of YouTube. I've made some other short segments on sound. There's plenty of other people doing research, but amazing technology and so on. Learn more about sound and how it comes to your body and how we perceive it and so on, because there's a story about how the inner ear can sense the vibration of one length of an atom of hydrogen, which is really small. So from the reference point of stillness that's within us, there's a whole range of music, you might say, and sounds that are made in our creation that are actually part of sustaining our own body and everywhere we look. So by understanding silence and sound, you can understand like subtle vibrations, observable vibrations like waves in water, things you can hear, and then you can apply that to the larger scale of how cosmic energy moves, how it's perceived, how it embodies itself, how it attracts matter to itself, and so on. So I welcome people to give me feedback. I'm just one voice out here talking about some interesting stuff that I've discovered, and I appreciate all the feedback I've gotten so far. I do watch a lot of other people's content. There's a lot of amazing souls on the planet right now doing all kinds of amazing things, and I think 2012 is going to bring us into something really quite extraordinary, because it isn't going to be an ending here. What we're going to do is we're going to see about the next 10 years and see how we can blast off in many ways, technologically and by commuting and sharing and traveling and learning.